we're very fortunate to have William Hamilton, who is with the Southern Appalachian Highlands Conservancy, and he's going to help us think through the conservation model. How do you think about conservation relative to agricultural land and to whatever extent that can be applied to the old Coggins Farm? William Hamilton.
Thank you. Good to be back at my old alma mater. I'm a proud graduate of Warren Wilson College. Lolita, you're a tough act to follow. Let's see here. I've got a slideshow. I'm not sure if, okay, here it is. Can anybody see this? I know the light is not like in a dark room, but this is a picture of Fairview, by the way, and that is Roy Ramsey plowing his tractor, plowing out his fields. Well, my name is William Hamilton, and I am from Fairview, North Carolina. John Ager is my uncle. I had the good fortune of growing up with him and growing up at Hickory Nut Gap Farm, where my cousin and my best friend Jamie Ager produces, as you know, Hickory Nut Gap Farm meats and all things like that, and my sister grows organic vegetables, so I just get to eat there and don't have to do any work other than just go about doing my job. So I feel really lucky that way. Great place to raise my kids. Got 4 children under the age of 10, 2 girls and 2 boys. Yeah, I at the Southern Appalachian Highlands Conservancy, I specialize in agricultural conservation easements, and I know a couple people in this room who have conservation easements of their own. Becky Anderson protected her farm in Spring Creek with a conservation easement, and John Ager protected his mountain pasture with a conservation easement, and Hickory Nut Gap Farm with a conservation easement. So definitely I feel like that I'm, with my background and my passion for land, I'm definitely in the right position. And I feel very fortunate with all the passion in this room for land, the mountains of western North Carolina, that I am able to do a job that allows me to work within the bounds of our legal system to protect properties from subdivision and development for the greater good and for the good of the landowner. So that's myself. I'll introduce, let me see if I can figure out how to use this clicker here. So that will advance me to the next slide. All right. The Southern Appalachian Highlands Conservancy, where I work, is a nonprofit land trust based in Asheville, and our mission is to conserve the land and water resources of the Southern Appalachian Mountains. And in 2014, we will celebrate our 40th anniversary. And this picture you see here of is of the Roan Highlands, where we got our start back in the late 60s and early 70s. I grew up in Fairview and didn't even know that the Roan Highlands existed until I worked at SAHC, because I just lived in my own little world. But once I made it up there, it's definitely one of my favorite places. How do our accomplishments add up? I'm just going to give you a little background on SAHC, because I feel like I need to do that. Let's see, in the year 2000 is not the year that I started working at SAHC. But we went from 12,000 acres up to 63,000 acres as of this year. But that is the year that Carl Silverstein started working at SAHC, who is our boss. He won't ever tell you that, but it's a fact. So 63,000 acres protected for you forever. When you think about what a land trust does, you know, the message we're trying to get across to people is that we're trying to work in your community and our communities to protect and improve everybody's quality of life. And that includes protecting places that people love to visit or love to live in their whole lives. Getting back to what Ian was said about a sense of place, I think the land trust is all about a sense of place. That's where everything starts. We protect scenic views from public vantage points. We protect rivers that serve our region's needs. And we connect places for people and wildlife and plants. A big part of a land trust's job is to prevent fragmentation of the landscape so animals can move freely across the landscape, as well as plants and people. And then my love and my job is protecting working farms and soils that supply local foods. When I first started at SHC in 2005, there was sort of some question as to whether, from the Board of Trustees, whether we're maybe wasting our time on this, and maybe this position was not a good, it was a distraction from our primary work was in the Roan Highlands and, protecting land, buying land and selling it back to the National Forest or the state park system. And I kind of knew that, but I just kind of kept my head down and worked hard. And my reaction to that attitude was that, we've really, it's important to protect places to visit, but it's also important to protect places where we all live and where we spend all of our time down on these farms. So to me, it's always made a lot of sense. Okay, so when we say protect land, what does that really mean? How do you do that? And there's a few ways we do it. One is to, we often will get people call us up and will, or even the landowners will call us up and say they need to sell their land. Their land's adjacent to any number of state parks or the Smoky Mountain National Park or along the Parkway, and do we want to buy it? And if we, and oftentimes that is how National Forest Land and the Blue Ridge Parkway expands their territories, is they cannot come up with the money as fast as a land trust can. So a land trust will step in, buy the land, and hold it for a period of time until our local congressman can convince the those in charge of the Land and Water Fund to release some funds, and then they can buy it, and we'll sell it to them at that point. And then sometimes we'll accept gifts of land. We accepted a 100-acre farm in Alexander a few years ago from a woman that wanted to protect her farm with a conservation easement, but she outlived her husband and her son, and she really didn't want to tie her son's hands, but when he died, she went ahead and just didn't need the money, so she just deeded us the farm. I mean, it's not easy. The problem with that one was that she had it in agricultural tax use, which gave her a huge tax relief, but at that time, nonprofits couldn't qualify for that, so we ended up paying a $30,000 back tax on her behalf to accept the land. But now this is the one that we're turning into the incubator farm over in Alexander. And then this is my buddy here, Will Jeffers, who bought a farm over in Leicester. And this is the third way we protect land, is to accept conservation easements, which I already mentioned. But as you see, this farm, it lays really well. It's got some French loam on it. You can stick a plow on that and never hit the bottom. And so he was able to, working with me at the land trust, he was able to buy this farm, about 90 acres, and then after, that was in 2012, and so by the end of this year, we'll have raised enough money to purchase a conservation easement on it to pay him back half of what he paid for it. And so this is just an example of a young farmer, of the land trust providing a means for someone to buy land, but they have to come up with the capital before and take the risk that all these programs will be in place. And this just goes into, I want to get back to what Ian was saying and what Lolita have focused on about the big picture and the enclosure system. I didn't know that word really, hadn't heard that word before, but private property rights. Because, you know, as we all know, Copper Coggins' farm is owned by her, and she has her private property rights that, you know, for better or worse, we all sort of, that's the American way. And so, but the land trust is pretty much confined to working within the legal system we have. Everything we do is based on a meets and bounds survey and a title description and a appraisal, and very rarely do we, I guess sometimes we kind of get outside of those situations when we buy land and then sell it to the Forest Service. That's a little different, but primarily what we do is protect private property within the private property sector. And it's kind of a unique thing. It's actually a good thing, because I don't know of any other country in the world that has this system where private landowners can permanently protect their property from subdivision and development forever and go to the grave with that. And it's a very unique, interesting way to deal with land. And it works for farmers really well, because they often want to keep it in the family. They don't want to risk having their children fight over it and have to subdivide and develop it to settle estates. So conservation easements can work very well from either charitable giving or from a fundraising standpoint. I wanted to point out, this is right down the road here, this fellow Bruce DeBrule, that John Egger will know him well, because John's the chairman of the Buncombe County Agricultural Advisory Board that helped pay for Bruce and his I think his aunt to donate a conservation easement on the 60 acres that, if you drive out Warren Wilson Road here, right before you get to Davidson Road and right after you pass the Swananoa Fire Department, that little storage unit, there's an old house on the left that's kind of fallen down, and on the right there's those fields. That's all permanently protected by Bruce and his aunt, and they donated a conservation easement worth about $650,000, and they don't have any children, and so it was a great way for them to do that, but then leave it to their goddaughter as well. Where we work, the Southern Appalachian Highlands Conservancy works in about a 10-county region that spans from, let's see, Jackson, Haywood, Madison, Buncombe, Yancey, Avery, Mitchell counties in North Carolina, and Greene, Unicoi, and Cocke counties in East Tennessee, parts of those. We don't have a very strong presence in East Tennessee right now because our offices are in Asheville, but there's a lot more conservation dollars in North Carolina. Our government has been terrific about, less so recently, but over the years, putting money into land conservation. I'll try to stick with the program here rather than getting distracted. I'm gonna. These are some sort of more academic statements about why protecting farmland is a good idea. I know I'm definitely preaching to the choir here, but they are food security for number one. And the biggest source of money for farmland preservation in the United States is from the Farm Bill, and it just got passed again when they've got a huge amount of dollars in there for preserving farmland, and that's really what I spend all my time on, trying to get those federal dollars to bring to Western North Carolina. But the reason that money is available is because of food security. That's why our U.S. Congress puts the money there to make it available. Our heritage, Becky Anderson couldn't have spoken more finely about that. Farmland, if managed well, can protect water quality. You know, it beats impervious surface by a long shot. Wildlife habitat, and you always see all kinds of wildlife on farms. And then this farmland is cheap for local governments to service. And I think, are you from Buncombe County government? So it's a good one for you to hear. Is that there's been some cost of community service studies done nationwide by the American Farmland Trust, and they the basic gist of it is that developed residential land on average costs local governments to about $1.16 for every dollar they bring in over time. And then farmland and forest land cost local governments about 37 cents for every dollar they bring in. And that's because nobody's living on that farmland or forest land. You don't need to build new schools because there's no people there that have kids to go. You don't need all the public services that come with subdivision, and developments over time are expensive. I'll get you a copy of the book. And then economic base, Western North Carolina, probably not, you don't see it as clearly, but as a state, agriculture is our #1 industry economically. So we're doing well, but it's a lot of that sweet potatoes and hogs. And then, of course, in the mountains, scenery, and then relief from sprawl. Sprawl is kind of one of the reasons I got into the land trust world, because it just bothered me so much, to see. The one thing that really bothers me more than anything is storage units built on prime farmland. It's like, what a waste of space, and that's, it's all our junk, that we just don't need to keep anyway. So, and that's a common thing that happens on prime soil because it's flat. It's usually in a floodplain, and you don't need septic for a storage unit. So when you're out there looking around, that's usually where they are. This is an interesting. We did some. This isn't going to mean a whole lot to you until I tell you what it is. But this is the map of Buncombe County, and all the dark red, which you may not be able to see, indicate prime soils. There's 3 different types of important agricultural soils across the country. One is prime, and that's a nationally recognized status that you get, and it's like the cream of the crop for food production, for plow land. And then you've got state important soils, which are usually your a little bit upland pastures, and then you've got locally important soils, which are classified by each county. So they're usually more common and not all that productive. But only an interesting fact that we did a study. Had a fortune to get some stand-back interns to come in from Duke Nicholas School of the Environment and work for me a couple summers, and we found that only 2% of the land mass in Western North Carolina consists of prime agricultural land. And that goes true for the whole Appalachian chain from up north down to here. Only 2% of the land mass consists of prime agricultural land. So it's that was what finally convinced my board and that our farmland program had merit, because it's they like protecting things that are rare in nature, like lichens and mosses. And so I could convince to them that prime soils were also rare in nature. And that was a good day for me. This is just an example of how a conservation easement financing works. And you'll recognize the acres there. I've got 170 acres, and at about $25,000 an acre, or 4.3 million. Based on the appraisals that we've seen, this would put the value of the development rights on a tract like that at about 3.6 million. So that's what the conservation easement would be worth. Oftentimes we use percentages when we go out and say, well, we can pay X percentage of what the development rights are worth, but when it comes up to this kind of value, we can't do that because we're working with a limited amount of money at the federal, state, and local level to raise, to then go say, offer the landowner, this is what we can pay you for your development rights. If you want to keep your farm in your family, but you need equity, you need to turn the value of your land into cash, but don't want to sell your farm, then some numbers we kind of threw out there early on with these type of values were like, with going to federal, state, county, private money, we could get somewhere between $600,000 and $900,000 to pay a landowner for, and that just doesn't touch the you know, what a developer could pay if they were wanting to develop it out. So we don't compete with developers. We work one-on-one with landowners, and we have to be working directly with the landowner and it's a voluntary transaction, and so that all ties back into private property rights. You know, these are voluntary transactions that just kind of have to be a very tight and smooth partnership between the landowner and the land trust in order to, for us to go out and raise any money at all. There has to be a huge level of commitment by the landowner that they want to go through with this kind of thing. So we, as far as the Coggins farm goes, you know, I know the property's under contract, and that there's a lot of momentum going down the road to Mr. Case doing what he wants to do and doing what he needs to do. But if he, I went to one of the earlier charrettes out there, and they were wanting to, you know, think about doing a conservation easement on part of the land that, and so we're open to that. If they want to preserve their prime soils and all of their farm at the bottom and some of their older white pine stands in the back and that kind of thing, we're open to that. But we go through a process of evaluating whether we want to take an interest in a piece of property and protect the conservation values. Every conservation easement we do is a risk for us because we're obligated to enforce it in perpetuity. So I've gone over 15, 20 minutes probably, but I should open it up to questions. If anybody's got any questions, so go fire away.
What circumstances can a piece of land be taken out of a conservation easement? Like, are there things like
Yeah.
eminent domain?
Eminent domain, nailed it, and condemnation.
I sense that many of the things we're saying are based on values that are traditional and communal in nature, or pre-capitalistic, or at least modified capitalistic, and drawing on ancient traditions. In the Farm Bill, is there much connection drawn? I noticed heritage was on your list, as well as conservation. Do they try and draw out the relationship between heritage and conservation? Is there much real talk about heritage in the new Farm Bill?
That's a great question. I have, I would, my gut feeling is that yes. When you, at least when you look at it, how the American Farmland Trust portrays it, there's a lot of heritage and a lot of emotion, and but I have not read the Farm Bill. I hear it's pretty big, and but yeah, I would think so. I think so.
I was wondering about the funding for the organization. You know, as far as protecting it in perpetuity, that's going to cost some money down the road.
Cost money, yeah.
Yeah, where is that funding coming from?
With every transaction we do, we ask for approximately $20,000 to $25,000 gift from the landowner. We have a formula that we calculate as to what it's going to cost for us to do, and we don't often get that, but we ask for it, and then if we need to ask for something less, then we'll do that. Or if the landowner is in no position to make that gift, then we'll ask a private philanthropist to make that gift on their behalf. Sometimes it'll come out of the proceeds. We'll just work it out that way, you know. And we do have a stewardship endowment at the Western North Carolina Community Foundation that we continue to build. Because without money, there's no teeth in the agreements. But every agreement we have is a recorded public document, you know, at the courthouse. It's legal and binding. thank you, Ian, for the opportunity to speak and to learn from all the other terrific speakers.